Entitlement looks powerful from the outside, arguing with staff, demanding exceptions, and pushing past rules. But that attitude collides with reality in ways that may end badly. In this video, we're uncovering 6 Karen accidents, each one proving that arrogance can be fatal. It was July 11th, 2015 in Bloomington, Minnesota. A mall was crowded with weekend shoppers moving between stores, food courts, and attractions. Music from kiosks mixed with the constant hum of conversation. On the second level, one of the escalators near the east wing was partially cordoned with a yellow caution cone, a reminder of recent cleaning. Most people diverted to nearby stairs or elevators, but not everyone chose to wait. Linda McClellan, 52, was a longtime resident of the Twin Cities and a regular mall visitor. She worked in property management, but was better known among local shop employees for her sharp tongue and short temper. Clerks recalled her demanding refunds or lecturing staff about service. Away from public spaces, she lived alone in a quiet apartment complex. Shopping was one of her routines, a way to pass time as well as exercise control in an environment where she felt she held authority. The escalator itself was standard for the mall, a 2-story incline of steel steps with rubber handrails and grooved treads. Cleaning crews often mopped them late mornings, leaving cones for damp surfaces. The danger was not hidden. Slips on moving escalators can lead to severe head injuries due to the sharp metal edges. Mall policy relied on clear signage and cones rather than closing the escalators entirely, expecting visitors to heed the warnings. That afternoon, Linda noticed a janitor finishing his work near the base of the escalator. Dissatisfied with the streaks she thought she saw on the steps, she made her disapproval known, raising her voice at the worker. Witnesses later described her as visibly irritated, muttering as she walked. Without slowing, she stepped past the caution cone and onto the moving escalator, still clutching her shopping bags. Other shoppers hesitated but did not intervene, assuming she would steady herself. As she climbed, her heel slipped on a damp patch of metal. The shift was sudden. Her weight rocked forward, then snapped backward as she fought to steady herself. Her shopping bag swung wildly, pulling her further off balance. For an instant, she clutched at the handrail, fingers scraping, before her grip failed. Her body twisted awkwardly as she toppled. The fall was violent. Her back struck first, her head snapping against the jagged edge of a rising step. She slid downward, limbs jerking against the moving teeth of the machine, each ridge scraping fabric and skin. A red smear began to streak across the steps, darkening as blood pulsed from the wound at the back of her skull. Shoppers recoiled, some shouting, others frozen in horror. A man shoved toward the emergency button. The machinery jolted to a stop, leaving her body half collapsed across the metal. Security and medical staff on scene rushed to her. CPR was attempted on the landing, but the extent of the head trauma was clear. The fractured skull had caused catastrophic damage, and she was declared dead before transport. Shaken shoppers were escorted away while staff draped barriers to block the view. In the days that followed, several mall workers were offered counseling, one janitor later admitting he avoided the East Wing entirely for weeks. Among frequent shoppers, the story spread by word of mouth rather than through official channels. Parents warning children to avoid escalators, clerks recalling the sound of her fall in hushed tones. Her family arranged a quiet burial at a local cemetery, declining press inquiries. It was May 22, 2016, at the London Zoo in Regent's Park, England. The day was mild, the crowd steady, and families lingered at the exhibits. The lion enclosure drew clusters of visitors, children pressing against the rail to glimpse the animals pacing the grassy habitat below. By mid-afternoon, the routine hum of chatter would break under a scene that left witnesses shaken and staff scrambling. Patricia Walker, 56, had taken the train from her home in Watford for what she described to neighbors as a casual Sunday outing. Known among acquaintances for her sharp tongue, conflict for her was routine, asserting control in everyday situations where she felt ignored. She had no real history of risk-taking in outdoor activities, but in public spaces, She frequently pushed against rules and restrictions, dismissing them as unnecessary. The lion exhibit was designed with multiple safety layers. A low rail kept visitors back several feet from a concrete lip, beyond which a dry moat dropped roughly 12 feet into the enclosure. The animals, 3 adult lions, occupied an open savanna space with grass, boulders, and logs. Clear signage warned guests to remain behind the barrier, and staff at the station often reminded anyone who leaned too close. Still, incidents of guests attempting to stretch over the railing for better photos were not uncommon. That afternoon, Patricia grew irritated after a staff member told her to step back. She complained loudly, accusing them of spoiling her visit. Ignoring repeated instructions, she leaned over the barrier, gesturing toward the lions as she mocked their inactivity. Several visitors nearby shifted uncomfortably, one father with a pram moving his children farther down the rail. Despite the warnings and visible signage, Patricia remained fixated, eventually leaning too far forward. Her shoe slipped against the smooth concrete edge, sending her weight past the point of balance. She pitched forward with a sudden cry, flipping over the rail and tumbling into the dry moat. Gasps rippled through the crowd as she landed hard, rolling onto the dirt floor below. For several seconds, the enclosure was silent, the lions pausing at the unexpected intrusion. Then 2 of them charged. The male struck first, clamping powerful jaws onto her shoulder. Patricia screamed, thrashing against the dirt, while a lioness swiped with extended claws, tearing into her arms and torso. Visitors screamed, others shielding children's eyes. Zoo staff responded within moments, deploying air horns and high-pressure hoses. The lions hesitated briefly under the blasts of water, but the male did not release his grip. Patricia's body twisted unnaturally as he pulled, blood streaking across the dirt. Within minutes, her movement slowed, then stopped entirely. Staff escalated efforts, finally forcing the lions back with repeated horns and sustained water streams, long enough to lure them into a holding pen. Emergency personnel entered only after the animals were secured. Patricia was pronounced dead at the scene, her body bearing massive trauma consistent with mauling. Witnesses, still clustered behind the rail, were led away quietly, many visibly shaken. Her relatives avoided questions about the circumstances when interviewed during her funeral. In a press conference, officials emphasized that the victim had disregarded posted rules and staff instructions, underscoring the limits of what safety measures could prevent when warnings were ignored. The zoo reinforced the barriers in the weeks that followed, raising railings and adding additional signage. It was August 19, 2017, in Austell, Georgia. The summer heat lingered over an amusement park, where crowds filled the park with noise and energy. The rides churned with mechanical rhythm, but beneath the excitement there was an unspoken tension. Later that evening, the park would be remembered for more than roller coasters and laughter. Melissa Daniels was 41, a marketing consultant from Atlanta, known for her blunt manner and impatience. Colleagues described her as sharp and outspoken, quick to point out incompetence as she saw it. She had steady work with small regional businesses and liked to project authority in public. Away from work, amusement parks were one of her indulgences. She followed ride enthusiasts' forums, often boasting she understood how restraints and ride systems worked. Her relationship with risk was one of control. She believed rules applied to others, not to her. Roller coaster rides rely on layered restraint systems, lap bars, shoulder harnesses, and seat belts, checked and locked by attendants before departure. The ride Melissa boarded, a looping steel coaster, used a rigid over-the-shoulder harness with an additional seat belt latch at the base. Operators required both to be secure before dispatch. Despite this, riders sometimes tried to test boundaries, pulling against restraints to prove how much movement was possible. That day, the coaster carried longer waits than usual. Temperatures were high, making crowds restless. Witnesses said Melissa complained aloud about the attendants moving too slowly during loading, mocking their efficiency. When it was her turn, she pulled her restraint down, but several passengers nearby noticed she deliberately pushed the belt aside, insisting she could manage it herself. An attendant gave a quick tug on the shoulder harness, but with a full cue pressing, the check was brief. A warning announcement played, reminding riders to remain secured. But Melissa looked unconcerned. The train climbed its initial hill with the sound of clattering chains. From below, the structure loomed above the park. Riders shouted and braced as the first drop plunged into speed. The train moved smoothly through twists and turns, then approached its first inversion, a tight loop that whipped bodies upside down. Security footage later confirmed Melissa had shifted in her seat, her torso not held as firmly as others. As the train inverted, her shoulders lifted clear of the restraint. The accident unfolded in seconds. Witnesses behind her saw her body rise as if weightless, then slip free. She flailed as she cleared the harness entirely, tumbling upward before gravity pulled her down. In full view of the row behind, she struck a steel support beam with crushing force, the impact audible over the screams. Her body fell through open space and hit the ground near a service path beside the track. The train completed its circuit, riders screaming both from fear of the ride and from what they had just seen. Some were hysterical by the time the cars returned to the station, hands trembling, faces pale. Operators halted boarding immediately while security rushed to the scene. Park medics reached Melissa within minutes, but her injuries were catastrophic. Records later showed she had died on impact, with no chance of survival. Her body was removed under tarps while crowds were quietly ushered away from the area. News spread quickly across the park, but details were scarce until the evening. The coaster was shut down indefinitely for inspection. In the days after, the focus shifted less to mourning and more to the behavior that had led to the fall. Park staff documented her refusal to follow instructions, and investigators noted that the safety systems had not failed. Back in Atlanta, her workplace acknowledged her absence only briefly. Colleagues who had often found her combative did not organize tributes, and no public memorial was held. It was November 6, 2017 in New York City. The Union Square subway station was crowded with evening commuters, a familiar blend of impatience, fatigue, and routine. Announcements echoed against tiled walls, trains roared in and out, and footsteps filled the platforms. Among the hundreds passing through, one rider would not leave the station alive. Brenda Weiss was 54, a longtime New Yorker who had spent most of her career as an office administrator for a mid-level insurance firm. Known by colleagues as sharp-tongued and stubborn, she prided herself on standing her ground in any situation. Outside work, she lived alone in a small apartment in Queens and had few close friends. Public transit had been the background of her daily life for decades, but she was notorious among staff for confrontations, especially during service delays. The subway system itself is an unforgiving environment. Tracks lie in an open trough between platforms, with 2 running rails carrying the train and a third electrified rail powering it. That rail carries over 600 volts of direct current, enough to kill instantly. Platforms are lined with warning strips, and frequent announcements remind passengers never to enter the track area. Despite this, incidents occur every year, often the result of accidents, disputes, or poor judgment. That evening, Brenda was on her way home after work. Trains were delayed due to a signal issue, and the crowd at Union Square had thickened. Witnesses later reported she cut ahead in line as a packed downtown train pulled in, pushing past several younger commuters. When challenged, she raised her voice, escalating the argument into shouts. As the verbal clash grew louder, she shoved one rider who tried to block her path. The movement left her off balance at the platform's edge. In the chaos, her foot slipped against the yellow safety strip. She teetered, arms flailing, before tipping forward into the open trough. Gasps rippled through the crowd as she landed between the rails, her body inches from the electrified line. For a split second, she tried to push herself up, but her left hand made direct contact with the third rail. The effect was immediate and violent. A bright flash lit the space, followed by crackling sparks. Her body stiffened and jerked uncontrollably, muscles locked by the current. Screams erupted as the smell of burning cloth and flesh spread across the platform. Some commuters instinctively reached forward, tossing jackets and scarves, desperate to pull her clear without touching her directly. None of it worked. The current held her in place, coursing through her body until her movements slowed and stopped. Station staff triggered power cutoffs, but by then the damage was irreversible. When the current ceased, she collapsed awkwardly across the ties, smoke rising faintly from her clothing. Emergency medical teams were called by the staff, rushing down within minutes, but examination confirmed what witnesses already knew. She had suffered catastrophic burns and cardiac arrest almost instantly. The platform was cleared, trains rerouted, and police sealed off the area for investigation. Commuters were shaken, some still crying as they exited the station. Surveillance footage confirmed the sequence of events: the argument, the shove, the stumble, and the fatal contact with the rail. Unlike most transit fatalities that leave a community in shock, Brenda's passing drew little sympathy. Witnesses described her as combative even in her final minutes, screaming at strangers and forcing her way forward. Some commuters remarked afterward that her temper had written the ending as much as the third rail had. The station was cleared, power restored, and trains resumed service within hours. It was July 2, 2018 in Bakersfield, California. The afternoon heat pressed down on the city, shimmering across asphalt parking lots and roadside stalls. Families lined up at temporary stands to buy fireworks ahead of the holiday. Among the bright packaging and banners, one tent would soon turn from a place of excitement into the scene of a fatal disaster. Cynthia Lopez, 36, was known in her neighborhood for her quick temper and bluntness. A former cashier who had bounced between jobs, she carried a reputation for berating clerks and teenagers who crossed her path. She lived alone in a small rental house, often filling her evenings with TV and cigarettes. Independence mattered to her, and she prided herself on never being pushed around. In public spaces, that tendency often escalated into conflict. The fireworks stand she visited that day was a temporary structure made of canvas, stretched over metal poles, stacked inside with cardboard boxes of sparklers, rockets, and aerial shells. These tents, while licensed, always carried a margin of danger. Fireworks are composed of black powder, fuses, and chemical compounds, all highly flammable. Regulations required no open flames, visible signage for fire risks, and portable extinguishers on site. Even with precautions, a single ignition could turn the enclosed space into an inferno. That afternoon, Cynthia walked into the tent demanding a refund for a bundle of sparklers she claimed were defective. Witnesses recalled her voice rising as she berated the young staff behind the counter. The employees pointed to the posted signs: no returns and no open flames, but she waved them off. In her agitation, she lit a cigarette while still standing inside, the smoke curling above stacks of boxed fireworks. Staff pleaded with her to step outside, but she ignored the warnings. In her agitation, she dropped the lit cigarette near a partially open box of aerial shells stacked by the counter. The glowing tip rolled against loose paper wrappings and exposed fuses, which caught almost immediately. Sparks raced across the box, and within seconds the first firework ignited, spitting fire into the tent. Panic overtook the space. Employees and customers bolted for the exit, some pulling each other clear. Boxes exploded in rapid bursts, sending embers raining across the lot. Cynthia staggered back from the counter, smoke thickening around her. Witnesses outside saw her silhouette framed by fire, coughing violently, her attempts to shield herself futile against the spreading heat. The tent collapsed inward as supports gave way, flames feeding on every surface. Onlookers used extinguishers and water jugs, but the fire was too fierce, so they dialed 911. Employees dragged each other free, their clothes singed, but Cynthia never emerged. Firefighters arrived minutes later, dousing the wreckage under plumes of black smoke. When crews searched the remains, they found her body near the counter, collapsed against scorched debris. Investigators determined she had died from severe burns and smoke inhalation, likely within moments of being overwhelmed by the blaze. Neighbors who heard what happened said it sounded exactly like her, too stubborn to follow rules, even when the rules existed to keep people alive. Some remarked bitterly that she managed to turn a family fireworks stand into a war zone just by walking in. Relatives kept arrangements minimal, avoiding questions from locals who remembered her as a constant source of arguments. The fire department's final note focused on reminding the public that ignoring safety signs could put everyone at risk. It was August 6, 2016, in Killeen, Texas. The evening heat pressed against the blacktop of a busy local mall parking lot, where carts rattled and engines revved as shoppers hurried in and out. The lot was crowded as usual, rows of cars packed tight with families weaving between them. It was routine chaos, until a confrontation turned into something irreversible. Diane Stokes, 47, was a familiar figure in Central Texas. She drifted through clerical jobs, but was known more for her sharp temper than her work. Employees at local stores recognized her as the type to argue at length over small inconveniences. She thrived on control, pushing conflicts further than most people would dare. She was also obese, carrying well over 200 pounds on her 5'4" frame, a fact that often left her winded with exertion but unwilling to admit any limitation. Parking lots, in particular, seemed to bring out her worst, an arena where she often called out other drivers and pedestrians for imagined slights. That evening, Diane parked in a middle row, returning later to find a stray shopping cart wedged against her sedan. Nearby, a man in his 20s was gathering carts into a line. Witnesses said she immediately confronted him, shouting that he had damaged her car. The worker tried to continue his task, ignoring her as he pushed the row of metal carts forward. Diane stepped in front of them, planting herself in the narrow lane. The carts, heavy with momentum, struck her thighs, causing her to stumble. Instead of moving aside, she grabbed the side rail of one cart, yanking hard. The sudden pull destabilized the line, and the front carts jackknifed. The metal frames lurched sideways, one striking her square in the chest. Her weight worked against her. Unable to regain balance quickly, her center of gravity shifted backward. She fell hard onto the sloped asphalt, the back of her head hitting the concrete with a sharp crack. The cart, still moving, rolled partially over her legs before the worker managed to stop them. Witnesses later described the sickening sound when her skull struck the pavement, followed immediately by a dark pool spreading beneath her hair. Her size made it difficult for bystanders to move her, several struggling before realizing she was unresponsive. Some screamed, others froze, while the worker frantically tried to lift the carts off her. Diane's body twitched once, then went still, her eyes open and unresponsive. Within minutes, paramedics arrived, but nothing could be done. Afterward, there was little sympathy. Shoppers who recognized her told reporters she was the same woman they had seen berating cashiers or blocking aisles for arguments no one else wanted. Her collapse was described less as a tragedy than as the natural end of her own confrontational habits. The mall returned to business within hours, quietly noting they would remember the incident more as a disruption than a loss. Thanks for watching. If these stories of people's entitlement leading their own deaths entertained you, click here for more.